process that takes us from confusion to understanding in a manner that is precise, predictive, and reliable. Yet there is that element of chance, and to move from a hypothesis to a desired conclusion, to a solution from a problem, can be so empowering and emotional, despite the general thought of the scientific process being of a strictly methodical nature. Especially for diseases, the results of research are not just a salute to the inquisitive imagination of a scientist, but also maybe a boon to someone's life, at whatever stage they may be. It strengthens their hope to emerge from pain and to end their suffering. When it comes to cannabis, among its various potential uses, its effectiveness for pain management gains more and more strength from research. Cannabis can target chronic pain, inflammation, anxiety, and nausea, among many other domains of palliative care. For example, based on a competitive data pool of 9,000 patients from 1975 to 2012, it has been confirmed that cannabinoids exhibit a therapeutic potential as analgesics for chronic neuropathic pain, as appetite stimulants, and even antiemetics for diseases such as cancer, AIDS, and hepatitis C, besides the treatment of various symptoms of multiple sclerosis and promising results in symptomatic treatments of other diseases and injuries. The trauma, in essence, is no longer so daunting, and the journey to healing is therefore less arduous. This is the compassion that we achieve in integrating cannabis with applications in medicine. Our science panel hopes to unravel the integral unanswered questions around the safety, efficacy, and contradictions pertaining to cannabis as a herbal drug. Our panelists will be Dr. A.K.S. Rawat, Dr. Arno Hazekamp, along with Dr. Navin Joshi and Dr. Alok Agrawal. Dr. Navin Joshi is an academic of yogic sciences and Ayurvedic medicine with a clinical and journalistic career spanning 17 years. Dr. Joshi currently works in Kumaon, Uttarakhand, where he works in creating awareness for endangered Himalayan medicinal herbs, including cannabis, through documentaries. He also works in the Department of Ayush in the Uttarakhand government as a consultant. Dr. Alok Agrawal pursued his postgraduate degree in psychiatry from the prestigious All India Institute of Medical Sciences. He remained at the institute as a research officer in a WHO-funded project and later as a senior resident. He later worked as program officer injecting drug use and opioid substitution therapy, and at the National AIDS Control Organization, that is the NACO, under the Government of India, wherein he contributed to the expansion of OST services for IDUs across the country. Please welcome our science panel.
Yeah, can we have the panelists up here, please? Thank you. Yeah. 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 So the whole point of the panel is to have a certain people who have like absolute relevance to the topic area, give us some insights into some of the talking points, and at the same time we will also take questions from the audience. We'll complement it with like a conversation as well as a dialogue. So let's see how we can take this forward. So the basic points of this specific science panel revolve around very simple questions that all of us have around cannabis, right? Like what do we think is India's opportunity to explore medical cannabis? What is the current situation in the whole opium versus cannabis aspect of palliative care? Prospects of maybe combining opium with cannabis in palliative care? Exploring the areas of science and medicine showing increasing trends of cannabis use medicinally in the global world. What role exists for collaboration between the Department of Ayush, existing other government ministries at this point of time? How can India really learn from the international success stories and use that has already been developed in the medical cannabis ecosystem? So these are just a few talking points that we have. We've shared these talking points with the panelists earlier as well. So any of the panelists who choose to go first share their opinion on the basic point of view on this area, as well as we can also engage with the audience with the right questions. So anyone willing to go first, or am I going to pick the first panelist? Okay, I think I'll have to pick the first panelist. So let's start with Dr. Navin Joshi. So Dr. Navin Joshi has been part of the Ayush department in the state government of Uttarakhand. He also has a lot of experience in working with different plants and herbs. In fact, he's also a very renowned Ayurvedic journalist who runs his own portal. So it'll be very nice to have your perspective on this, sir.
Myself, Dr. Navin Joshi. I'm a postgraduate in Ayurveda, and I am just working in the Department of Ayush as a consultant, and presently I am attached in Uttarakhand Ayurveda University. In Uttarakhand, as you know, that is a Himalayan region, and the cannabis is usually cultivated there by the local farmers. And in our culture, in Uttarakhandi culture, the cannabis seed is also used in our traditional food also. So government of Uttarakhand is also is doing to cultivate this as a traditional food. But the issue is that the medicinal use of cannabis is still not legalized in our state. As the Bombay Hemp Company is probably the first one who initiated a proposal, government of Uttarakhand, to pass this bill in cabinet, the industrial use of cannabis there. So as part of my field, I belongs to Ayush department, and Ayush is a 5 basic Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha and Homeopathy, 5 system based the department. So in Ayurvedic medicines, cannabis is used in many formulations like in Vesaja Ratnavali, the Gangadhar Churn, and so many formulations are explained in Ayurvedic medicines. And also in epilepsy also, in Vesaja Ratnavali, there are so many formulations where the use of cannabis is mentioned. But the problem is same, that no company is now come forward to formulate this product in commercial basis due to the legal issue. I think that through this event we can convey, as in first session we hear from so many speakers, and basically the 2 speakers, they explained that how the cannabis is medically used and it is legalized in many countries. I hope that through this platform we will put forward a proposal to government to immediately implement the government order for the legalization of cannabis in the state of Uttarakhand. Thank you.
My next question is for Dr. Rawat. Dr. Rawat has been a very, very senior ethnopharmacologist in India, and he's also has a credit of having BGR 34, which was the blood glucose regulator 34 to his credit, along with a team of scientists from CMAP as well. So Dr. Rawat, my question to you is about how do you think the right kind of these Ayurvedic formulations could be scientifically proven, considering we have different Ayurvedic acts and phytopharmaceutical acts? What do you think is the best way to portray it from a regulatory point of view?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Pandya. Yeah, so just now what our speaker already hinted that we have 2 approach. One Ayurvedic, Unani and Siddha, which comes under Ayush, which said that Cosmetic Act 1940, Schedule 158, we can have a Ayurvedic property medicine. As we know in Ayurveda, the plant is already mentioned and there are more than 15 classic formations are there. So that is one route which is a very short one. We can have 2-3 years and we can validate the claims also, and we can make a proper medicine also. First, like for pain, yes, we can have a formulation with this cannabis extract as per our drug act. Plus, we can make some combination to give more strength to our product. It will be work not one only to cure our pain. Also, it may be a antipyrety or maybe some other attributes. So this is the shortest route. Only thing we have to vary the things and quality control, which is a particular in case of cannabis. I mean, we have to generate the data also. Although in Ayurveda Pharmacopoeia of India, it is given some called chemical and anatomical standards are mentioned there. But again, we need further scientific validation, QC, like Dr. Arno has said. There are chemical variation as different chemotypes exist in India also, and I think nobody has worked on those lines also. So there is a big scope to work on that. But that can become under the phytopharmaceutical later on. So we have two approaches. One is Ayurvedic and there is a phytopharmaceutical approach, which will take more than 4 or 5 years, under which we have to identify number of 4, at least minimum 4 compounds. We have to do pharmacological study, plus safety in 2 animals, and efficacy and clinical also. And this phytopharmaceutical will not only, it will be, say, prescribed in India and abroad also, as per the FDA guidance also. But only in Ayurveda it is confined to our India and nearby countries where Ayurveda is accepted. So we have to follow 2 approaches, short term and long term. And I think the company you have initiated this work in India. We are the first one. So in NBRI also we are happy to have with you. You have assigned the problem to us. Our scientists will work on that. And finally, I hope that within a short period, we will come out a product which will be good for our people and as a globally also. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the insights, Doctor, and also breaking it down easier for us, saying that how the Ayush perspective is laid out for us and how the phytopharmaceutical perspective is laid out. My next question is to our international panelist, Dr. Arno Hazekamp. What kind of anecdotal experiences have you had with medical cannabis? I know most of your research is around different areas, but in terms of if you have met with any patients or if you have spoken to any patients, what has their experience been, specifically with regards to their chronic illnesses when they're taking cannabis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that people always want to know about your personal experience with cannabis, but if you work for a pharmaceutical company, you don't have to try all their pills before you're considered to be an expert. So that already makes cannabis a little bit different. Yes, I have had a lot of interactions with patients because we realized that if you bring something to the market, even if people ask for it, they still have a lot of worries and concerns. They don't always know what they're doing. They don't know how to approach their physician to get a prescription. So one of the things we did, especially in the early years, is you cannot go to individual patients because where are they, right?
Yeah.
The physician knows them, but they get their cannabis through the pharmacy, and we're not supposed to know who they are because that's privacy. So what we did, we started to interact with patient organizations and went to patient fairs for MS, for fibromyalgia, for cancer, all kinds of patients. And it's kind of like walking in the street and just listening to the buzz. Like what are people worried about? What do they ask for? And what are the solutions that companies and governments are creating for them? And one of the things that I realized after many of those talks is that the medical system tends to divide patients in medical indications. So if these are all the patients in the world, you slice them like this and you say, you have MS, you go to that hospital. You have cancer, you go there. You have epilepsy, you go to somewhere else, and you don't really see each other anymore. And you try to treat those patients with standard drugs, and some of them will not respond, and that's usually the minority, and then they have nowhere to go. But on the internet and through cannabis channels, there's magazines, there's websites, there's Facebooks, these people find each other. And they're not connecting based on their medical label, so what is my medical problem, but they're finding each other, I think, on the basis of symptoms. I can't sleep, you can't sleep, he can't sleep, so let's figure out how we can sleep. let's figure out how we can address pain. So the medical system looks at it like this, and the patients are looking, they're organizing like this.
So it's a grid format that they.
It's kind of a grid format. So, and you actually see that in surveys. If you ask people, what are you using cannabis for, and you ask about their medical problem, it's all over the map.
Yeah.
But when you ask about what symptom are you trying to treat, 5 things made up 75% out of a list of 47 very common symptoms. So I think that's when we start to realize, like, maybe we're not getting the right answers if you don't ask the right questions. So this is when we start to think about patient-inspired research. Because I'm worried that if people get in contact with cannabis and they find a wrong combination and it doesn't work, they're already desperate. They tried many things. They don't have a lot of patience. Sometimes they don't have a lot of time. And if the first try fails, they may give up on cannabis and think, like, oh, it doesn't work for me. Cannabis doesn't work for me. And the most amazing experience that I ever heard was from an old man. It was all the way in the beginning of the Dutch program. And he had overdosed on cannabis. Maybe Cholling remembers too. He had overdosed on cannabis, and he thought, he got high, he never knew what that was, and he thought that he had talked to God. And that wasn't a good thing for him. He said, people are not supposed to talk to God. You know, I'm afraid that I did something really bad. I will never touch this again. So then I realized that, you know, even things that could be funny in other circumstances have severe consequences in others. So you have to, like I said, you have to, science is science, has to be in the hands of scientists, and we have to do all these studies and trials, but in the meantime, we should also be inspired by patients. But then you have to know, where are they? Who are their spokespersons? Is it just one person speaking for all the cancer patients or all the MS patients? Probably not. But how am I supposed to know that? So you need another way to interact with those groups. And I think there's a lot of people here in this room that together can figure out much better how to access that information so that scientists actually know what they're supposed to be doing.
I think what Arno brought out was a good point, and my next question is to you, Dr. Agrawal. As you belong to the field of psychiatry and drug abuse and the abuse potential that a narcotic like this would provide to the system, so if based on your experiences while dealing with people, whether they have been using cannabis for a really long time, or whether they have been using opiates for a really long time. I believe you're also working on the opiate substitute aspect of it as well. So where do you see these people in terms of their abuse potential? Basically, if someone has been consuming cannabis for a really long time, what is it that you see with certain people like that? And what are the clear indications of someone who's been abusing the drug? Because the conference is to talk about all the good things cannabis can do, but contradiction is an important aspect of science. So we want you to throw some light on that as well.
Thank you. You made a very important point that when it comes to science, we have to look at both the aspects. We know that all treatments, all medicines, they not only produce therapeutic effects, they also have adverse drug effects which go hand in hand with the therapeutic efficacy. As far as cannabis is concerned, it is obviously, we all know that it is a recognized drug of abuse, and it's one of the most commonly abused drug in the world. That does not really undermine its therapeutic potential or its beneficial effects as an agent which can help certain category of patients, but at the same time we cannot really neglect that aspect as altogether. Worldwide, if you see, there are international UN organizations which look into these statistics every year, and worldwide, if you see that almost 4% of the world population has used cannabis in the previous year. 4% of the world population, we are about 7 billion now. So you can very well imagine the scale at which cannabis is used, despite it is prohibited in almost all countries of the world, except for a handful where recreational use is legalized. So despite being a substance which is not allowed or permissible legally for use, 4% of the world population has used it in the previous year. But that's not the troubling part, because it is possible to use cannabis without actually, encountering or suffering the harmful effects of this particular substance. The worrying part is that almost about 15 to 20% of these individuals who have used the drug, they also suffer from cannabis use disorders. And here we're not talking about, a disorder like cancer or some of the other chronic pain conditions, but disorders arising out of cannabis use itself.
These are more behavioral aspects.
So things like addiction to cannabis, one of the cannabis products, or cannabis-induced psychosis, which is one of the conditions it can lead to. So some of those, and even in India, the findings are not very recent. It's about 15-year-old findings, but 3% of our population had used cannabis in the preceding month, and about 25% of those individuals had cannabis use disorders. Okay. So it is a real risk with the use of one of the or the other cannabis products. Of course, with persistent use of this particular group of substance, there is another risk of psychotic disorders. Conditions in which the person starts developing delusions, hallucinations, and other kinds of behavioral problems. Now, cannabis can both lead to psychosis by its effect directly, as well as, what Arno just mentioned, that the guy felt that he was talking to God. So that's probably a hallucinatory experience. So it can occur both in intoxication. That means it is an acute effect while the drug has, is producing its effect on the brain. But also chronic use of cannabis can lead to psychosis also.
Yeah, it can
so
induce
which
psychosis.
will not then remain dependent on the use of cannabis, that you only have those experiences while you're using cannabis. Even when you're not using cannabis, those experiences may continue. But also it can actually precipitate psychosis in those who are already vulnerable. So people who have family history of disorders like schizophrenia or other psychotic illnesses, they tend to develop psychotic disorders more frequently when they are also using cannabis. And the risk is almost 6 times as compared to those who are not using cannabis. So those are some of the issues which we have to keep in mind when we are thinking of the medical effect, because people who may be prescribed cannabis for medical indications, they may not be immune to some of these effects of cannabis. Then there are other cognitive disturbances which can happen. Everybody who uses cannabis is not going to develop psychotic disorder, but some of them may develop other chronic effects. For example, if you are prescribing it by the smokable form, then there is a risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, bronchitis, and those kinds of illnesses. COPDs. So those are some of the other risks which we have to keep in mind. As far as our clinical practice is concerned, we do see people who are addicted to cannabis products, whether it is the resinous extract charas or ganja or bhang, and just like in case of other substances, once somebody reaches the stage of addiction or dependence, you'd see all the psychological, behavioral as well as biological substrates of addiction in that individual. So you see disturbances in behavior, you see problems in interpersonal relationships within the family and outside, difficulty in maintaining a job, financial problems, legal problems, because the substance happens to be illegal. So it is no different than any other addiction in that sense. But where it becomes a little difficult for us is that it is one of the more difficult addictions to treat. For many other addictions, for example, opioids or alcohols, you do have very good pharmaceutical treatments available. Yeah. But for cannabis, treatment of dependence is largely psychological. And that makes it a little more difficult to treat than as compared to some of the other addictions that we see.
Okay. I think, it's a very important point for us to be mature about it and understand that there are two sides to it. But at the same time, now comes the question of how do we balance the act, right? Because there are countries where psychiatry is practiced the same way as practiced here. There are countries where there is contradiction the same way it is here. But they've still been able to have a discourse and move ahead with it. So my next question is to the panel, and then I would also like I put it open to the crowd as well, to probably give in some suggestions of how do we balance the abuse potential of it, the possibility of diversion of the drug, compared and possibly equated with the positive use of it. So where is the striking factor in this, and what is the area of concentration that we should all be collectively looking at? We can start with the panel first, and then we'll move on to the audience as well. You want to go first, Arno?
I'm doing it the other way around. One of the things that came to mind is that when I heard the previous speaker gave a really good summary of the potential side effects of cannabis, is that in Holland we know what people are using because the composition is known, but also when you take a prescription in Holland, you go to the pharmacy, then all the information goes into a national database. So we are able to see, and it's a pretty unique system in the world, I believe, we can see not what people remember and what they say, because that's what you ask them when you do a survey, we can see the actual use. And we've figured out that over the entire program, from beginning to now, the average use of cannabis has always been 0.7 gram per day. Younger people, older people, men and women, there's a little bit of a difference, 0.7 to 0.8 roughly, but it doesn't seem to escalate. And even in Holland, with its high tolerance for cannabis, the biggest fear was that people would use more and more and more and more, so then the sales go up. That's great for Bedrocan, but actually the situation is getting worse. And that doesn't seem to happen. So when people are treated under the umbrella of a physician, so they're really sick, they're not just pretending, they tried other medications and their physician knows them very well, it seems to work out quite well.
Okay.
Of course, administration forms are very important, so you should not recommend people smoking. I think just the act of smoking itself, just bringing your hand to your mouth all the time is already part of the addiction. So administration forms can help. So in reality, and I don't know how this goes in other countries because it's not registered, these kind of numbers, but in Holland it seems that it's not really a big issue. And another thing that has always been something that I find very interesting is that I am not totally sure if it's only pure cannabis that creates psychotic problems and other health issues, because there is a lot of contaminations in street cannabis. And one of my colleagues once asked me many years ago if I ever looked at the side effects or the toxic effects of the pesticides that are commonly used in cannabis, because he did a little research just in his afternoon, and he said, you know, the things that pesticides do to you sound very much like what people think cannabis does to you. And how are we sure that those people that come to the clinic and say, you know, I have a health problem because of cannabis, nobody ever asks them, can I have a sample of your cannabis because I want to see if it's contaminated? It's no, oh, you're a cannabis patient. And you got in trouble. So I think there's a hidden layer of toxicology that may actually, and heavy metals and microbes and things. And I'm not saying cannabis is harmless. I don't think it is. And with pure THC, you find very similar health problems, addiction and psychotic, induction of psychosis. But I think you can draw a much better picture with clean pharmaceutical-grade cannabis. And then to conclude this, my remark is that in Holland we actually really don't see those problems in our medical population. It's now going for 15 years, and we talk a lot of patients outside in conferences and fairs. People call Bedrocan every day. They have contact with the Office of Medicinal Cannabis, and we've actually been worrying about this happening, so we've been actively looking for those signs, and we can't find it.
Okay.
So maybe the problem under a normal medical system isn't as big as you would fear. But
All right.
that remains to be seen.
Okay. Okay. You have a point? Yeah.
Taking two steps back, it still is a controlled substance, so that's where the regulator comes into control, and it is under a pharmaceutical scheme, so, or on a pharmaceutical regulation. That was why in my presentation earlier I said how important it is to bring, if you want to bring this to the market as a medicine, you should do it under the pharmaceutical system as a controlled substance. So it's a medicine and a controlled substance at the same time, like opioids. And from the opioid situation, you can learn in many countries that it is a working principle. It can work that way without, or as little as possible, diversion. If you work in a country where you have a problem with diversion, like in the USA, the situation is changing also. But I will leave it to that.
Okay.
Can I just add?
Yes, Dr. Agrawal.
I think, sir, both you and Arno both made an excellent point that it largely comes or boils down to implementation. In our country, like you have highlighted that at the end of the day, if it is, if these products have definite indications and they are, they have good efficacy for those indications, they should very well be part of the pharmacopoeia. But at the end of the day, we all realize that there is a certain abuse potential. And when that happens, they will remain controlled substances with specific set of indications and specific well identified or licensed settings in which they can be used. Unfortunately, as far as India is concerned, we have not had very good experience trying to implement some of those regulations. For example, almost a third of people who inject drugs in our country, they inject pharmaceutical products, which are not bought from pharmacies, but they are all manufactured by the same pharmaceutical industry. So while our hospitals are providing the same medicines for valid indications, and they are taking it through the legal route, the same manufacturing industry is also catering to the huge market which is outside the purview of regulators and is actually contributing to the epidemic. So it all boils down to implementation, which at times is very difficult in India. Because the pharmacies are not that well sort of regulated in our country. So this is something that we have to keep in mind when we are thinking, like the Dutch example. It is it is not possible for anyone to get registered as a fake patient in Netherlands and to get it bypass the regulations and purchase it from a pharmacy. But whether
because
we
then
will
the
be able
physician's
to,
license is highly questioned and his ability to practice and everything.
And that is, in fact, that it is the same debate which has led to restricted availability of opioids for various indications in our country.
Yeah.
And very recently some changes have been made, but it has taken us decades to actually reach that level.
Yeah.
We have been a little too careful with regards to the availability of opioids as well because of the same situation. So, I think one of the most important factors which probably will govern which way the regulator goes is the availability of evidence for its medical effectiveness. And I'm not sure how strong the medical evidence at the moment is.
Yes.
If we do have very strong evidence, I think the regulator would be more than...
Yes, I think that's a very valid point by Dr. Alok Agrawal as well, and that's something that we all need to be open about, that the implementation aspect is we can't look at it from a zoom out point of view, like if it's the same way in the Netherlands, will it work in India? Definitely not. Yes, Dr. Khandelwal, you have a point?
In continuation of what Alok has said, that when it comes to the hardcore evidence, we have advocated the use of narcotics for now essential narcotic drugs.
Yeah.
That has been due to the effort of what we have put into the ministries, that narcotics should be made easily available for people who are suffering from, let's say, cancer pain, and also for people who need them for their medical use because of their opiate addictions. Because we could produce them the evidence.
Yeah.
So if evidence is forthcoming about the cannabis, I'm sure we'll be among the leading institutions to advocate its use as well as to decriminalize it. Because at this time, what is bothering every one of us is that at this time, the use of cannabis is a criminal offense under the NDPS Act.
Yeah.
So that we have to be careful.
Yeah.
So, but we also know that now the advances have gone ahead about the medicinal use of cannabis, and not only medicinal use. In fact, the International Narcotic Control Bureau is debating about its permission for recreational use also.
Yeah.
And I think in
rescheduling the drug as well.
they would permit its recreational use. I think that's what Holland does. But Holland is a very, they are doing it in a very controlled manner. But not many countries have been able to replicate a Dutch model.
Yeah.
So, if I could ask a question, if I could just say, India always had, in the Act, NDPS was formed in 1985. Before that, cannabis was completely widely available and used in India. And all that I see when people speak to God in India is they become a Baba. They don't become psychotic. People follow them, and there's a whole following that they have. So it's up to the use that people actually use it for, and how much they use is something up to each individual. It doesn't. One particular thing is not going to make the whole society bad or contaminate the whole thing, But it's up to us, and we've had this in our society for a very long time.
No denying that it has been a part of our ancient culture system.
Yeah.
We have been using it for socio-cultural purposes, in socio-cultural events, for practically all the religious events, in many of our festivals. So it has been part of our system, no doubt about it. But at the
Yeah.
We all know the history of the British Hemp Commission.
Yeah.
That it has maligned cannabis and to bring it back to the permissible legal use is not going to be all that easy now.
Yeah.
And for that we have to be, we should be having very strong evidence
Yeah.
that there is a need now to make its use legal
Yeah.
for, if not for recreational, which is already happening,
Yeah.
but at least for medical use.
Yeah. So what the other worry is that there are a lot of people in India today, of course they have access to the internet, they're reading about all the things that happen in other parts of the world. They are actually buying street cannabis using like backdoor methods and homemade methods to develop these medicines at home. Now we don't know the lead content, the arsenic content in street cannabis. We don't know what kind of other compounds it's coming with. So this probably this restricted philosophy of sometimes that we have is resulting into induced abuse as well. For some people who actually want to use it as medicine, actually end up using some street weed as medicine. So that is another problem also that I see.
Look, we will not, while I agree with what you are saying, people are buying it on the internet and from other sources which are, because it's not legally available, they have to depend upon illicit sources.
Yeah.
But at the same time, since this is a science panel, I would like to highlight that what you said is an impression.
Yeah.
That people are buying it as a medicine. We don't know that. Nobody has scientifically studied it and documented that what part of the internet-based purchase is for medical purposes and what part of it is for recreational purposes.
I'm sorry, just to mention, the internet part is to learn how to extract the oil, but like cannabis is available everywhere.
Yes,
So-
I mean, we don't really need to go on the internet. I mean, 70% of our population, or at least 65% of our population is in the villages. They don't have to go through internet or anyone else. It grows on the roadside, and they just rub the plant and use it. So they don't have to go depend on anyone else to use cannabis.
Yeah.
Now, whether some of them are using it for medical purposes or for
that's-
just recreational purposes.
Absolutely.
Because
That's
the point you made, sir, that point is valid for even legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes as well. That it has been part of our culture, our society, our medicine for centuries. So why should it have been sort of criminalized in the first place? But whether that point is valid for legalization of specifically medical marijuana, I'm not so sure. Because when we talk of legalization specifically of medical marijuana, it has to stand on its own as an entity which warrants legalization vis-a-vis recreational marijuana.
Yeah.
Sir, also what has happened since the time cannabis has been banned in India is that you can see from the narcotics statistics, the use of chemical drugs has gone tremendously high in India. Why would you see that if people were dependent on a natural drug or whatever you want to call it, and then now people have completely dependent upon chemical drugs and they're losing their houses and society is being ruined. So that is permissible in one sense that it's okay because that's made by chemical, but something coming from natural is still questionable because our society wonders what.
Sir, I think we are talking about two different things. One is the medical use. For medical use, we have to know the medicinal properties of that particular, compound, and out of the whole plant, which can have thousands of chemicals, which particular chemicals have medicinal value. We have to understand that, and that is, I think, the research which Sir was referring to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Dr. Rawat, you have a point to make.
In fact, everything has a positive thing and negative thing. Even water is sometimes poison if you take more. So generally what we have taken in the last so many in India, cannabis mainly bhang, mainly is for a narcotic, mainly. Medicinal things are there in Ayurveda. I think more than 50 formulations are prescribed. I think the Ayurveda. It is a legal document as per the Cosmetic Act. Anybody, any company want to dispense, manufacture, they can do. I think it is as per the Ayurveda. So there is but generally we are going for cannabis. It is we will have in mind, it is for nasa. I mean, for narcotic point of view. Even scientists also, we never work what he suggested. Scientists also afraid it. Why to work it? Because generally people say it is working as a narcotic, so we have forgotten its medicinal value. Also in our Ayurveda is old test, it is mentioned that it is good not for narcotic, it is good for number of elements are there, diarrhea is there, and insomnia is there, and old age related medicines are there.
Exactly.
So many things literature is there.
Yeah.
Only thing we have to pick up those things what our country allowed to, to market it, not that.
Yeah.
And other way is that phyto-pharmaceutical,
Yeah.
where we need a scientist, we need a pharmacist, we need a chemist, and clinical trial. As per Drug Act, which only November 2015.
It's a 1 year old.
It was
yeah,
not
draft,
one.
1 year old draft.
Yeah, it was now in India it is. So we have to work on those lines to say a drug, what are the legal implications are there.
Yeah.
Even our drug controller in India, Dr. Singh was there.
Yeah.
He said, you give us data, we will give you permission. It is not a cannabis or any XYZ plant.
Yeah.
You show
yeah.
the.
And it's a very good point mentioned by Dr. Rawat, because even as per a 5,000-year-old text, it still calls cannabis a toxic plant. It is still referred to as a toxic herb. Yes, it can help, but they have not run away from the point of contradiction, saying that it's all good, please consume it. So the perception of it being liberally used is not the same perception that our forefathers had when they were actually writing the books. Hence, even in Ayurveda, cannabis has to go through a shodhana technique, which is basically a purification process. And the purification process is to get rid of some of the unwanted elements that we might consider wanted at that point of time. So I think that's a very good point mentioned by
just
Dr.
I will also add,
Yeah.
cannabis, I think it is not a single, it is a polyherbal in Ayurveda. It is more
Dr.
than one.
Navin Joshi
Actually,
also
the cannabis is mentioned in Ayurvedic text as a Vijaya, in name of Vijaya. As the name of Vijaya, you just understand that what importance the name already chosen, the Vijaya.
It means victory, right?
It victory.
Victory, yeah.
Means there are so many formulations in which cannabis is used. And in my opinion, every medicine or drug is a chemical, and it has certain effect and side effect, and also adverse effect. So we can't ignore the effects of the cannabis due to the negative adverse effect or drug abuse which is going into our society. So I think that we have to think about the positive effect of the cannabis.
In your studies of abuse, did you find any of them using for medical purposes also? Do you have any data on the same? That any of the
or people like letting you know that they're using it for that purpose.
Generally, when we have done epidemiological surveys, we routinely ask a question that why did you initiate a particular drug, use of a particular drug? And one of the options under that question is that I started to treat a certain pre-existing condition. So that would probably reflect the medicinal use. But for almost all substances except for benzodiazepines, the sleeping medicines that we sometimes see, for all other substances, that is a very minuscule, proportion of individuals who agree that they started using those substances to treat a pre-existing condition. Most common reason for starting use of substances, two of the most common reasons are curiosity and peer group influence. That means other people of my own age or of my community, they were doing it, so I tried. And the other is
pressure,
curiosity. Yeah, it's not exactly pressure actually. They voluntarily try it, but they get influenced by people who they are otherwise their friends or role models.
Got it.
I got a small question for gentleman from Netherlands. So you just now mentioned it's 0.8. Yeah, I have your full details what you have written also. So you said it's 0.8. You're saying that's the consumption level out there. Sorry.
0.7 grams.
0.7. Okay. Now I got one very simple question from the panelist, and Dr. Alok just now said, okay, medical uses are being abused. Pharmaceutical products are being abused. In Punjab, it's 56% of youth who have already got into this abuse. Don't you feel so that it should be the time when we should get it regularized like Netherlands and stop this 56 going to 100? Both, sir. You gave a statement that it is pharmaceutical products which are being used for, as they are being abused. But look, there is a system out there where it is open but it is controlled. here there is no system, but we have lost the way.
Look, the point I was trying to make was not that pharmaceutical products which have abuse potential should not be available just because they can be abused. I was trying to highlight that component should not be neglected when we are trying to introduce a new pharmaceutical product into the market.
And I think the point you were making was also around diversion, that
Yes.
like the
And
same
secondly,
companies
the-
manufacturing them.
Yes.
Sir, my
Secondly, just let me finish it quickly, and Professor Khandelwal also wants to add to some to it. The second issue is that Punjab might have a big problem with specifically opioids in particular, but the problem is not as big as you are stating. 56% of youth
I'm just quoting
70%.
Google, sir.
No, that's what I'm saying. Those figures are, again, this is a science panel. Those figures are unscientific.
Yeah.
We ourselves have done a survey in Punjab and we have reported our findings. You can Google that specifically and you can get to know what are the scientific figures for Punjab.
And I think that's
The
a
figures are
WHO
not
report,
56%, even though the situation is pretty bad. So sometimes some of these the substances which are abused, sometimes they're maligned much more than the actual harm they might be causing in the society. So Punjab is a state which has become sort of an example for how the drug problem in a particular state can go bad. But even in that state, the problem is about 8 times less than what you're stating.
It be 8 times, sir, but it is not 0.7.
Huh?
It's not equal to systems.
That is different figure.
Why we should not ban
That figure
cannabis.
is 0.7 grams per day of use.
Okay, but then also, sir, we should not ban the whole product.
Absolutely
as a whole.
not. We
should
actually-
work on approvals of the product
Absolutely.
to get into a system.
Definitely. That's
Absolutely.
not what
Rather
anyone
than
is
saying
saying.
it's a bad drug, let it go.
No, absolutely not. In fact, we as an institution, and I think Professor Khandelwal is a better person to comment on that, we as an institution are actually quite in favor of relaxing some of the norms for availability of these substances, particularly for medical use and even in certain instances for recreational use. Look, sir, you were mentioning about the history of our country. For a long time, use of psychoactive substances in our country was socially sanctioned but also socially regulated. We turned it into a law and order problem by introducing laws around it, and we turned it into a legally regulated as well as illicitly procured or consumed, issue. Now we are in a situation, we are talking about decriminalization, legalization all over again, but right from the very beginning, the society governed the use as well as controlled the availability of these substances. And we did not really face that much of a problem at that point in time. So we do agree with what you are saying to a certain extent, and I think sir wanted to add.
I think Arno, you first.
Yeah, and then Dr. Khandelwal.
Do I like that eager? I think we're falling in a very classical trap here in this discussion, which is, here's the cannabis plant. Shall I use it as a medicine or shall I use it as a drug? But this is a science panel, right? So we know that only one of the components in cannabis can be used as a drug, and the rest can have all kinds of purposes. Maybe they're medicine, not so much. So I think one of the focuses of science is trying to create products with less abuse potential, maybe zero abuse potential. I think of CBD products in a modern formulated way, in methods that really reach the target area, that reach the cancer, reach the right body part, which are either not pleasant to abuse or have a very low abuse potential because you can't smoke them. And if you do that in the right way, maybe you can even get health insurance companies involved so they pay for it. So you remove the two worlds from each other. I think the problem with medicinal cannabis until now almost, a few years ago, is that medicinal cannabis in one hand and recreational cannabis in the other hand, I can't see the difference. So I can just take my medicinal cannabis and give it to my cousin and he smokes it. So we have to set on a scientific trail that moves away from this as fast as we can. And then there's always be a part that you can't easily fix. That's where the THC is actually the active ingredient. But that's only part of the discussion. So yes, there's an overlap, but also no, there's a very large part that has nothing to do with abuse. And the traditional use of cannabis in this country has probably a lot to do with THC consumption because it's fun. But the modern medicinal cannabis discussion has a lot of other focuses. Maybe the terpenes themselves, inhaled, can have a very strong pain reduction effect. Maybe if you use them together with existing drugs, you can increase their efficacy. So also don't forget that part of the research discussion that almost nobody has done significant research in.
India is the only country where
Yeah, but it's usually for the THC because those are the cultivars that are out there.
They use the leaves, they didn't use the flowers.
Same cannabinoids, just lower
Yes,
concentration.
It's still an intoxicant. Yeah, it's still an intoxicant. THC. Yeah.
But only part of the medical discussion is intoxication. A large part is or may
It's
not.
therapeutic as well. Yeah. Dr. Khandelwal, you had a point.
Arno has already answered this, so I don't have to.
All right.
Okay, so I have a question. So this cannabis dependency that people have, you don't know if it's cannabis or it's something like smack or rat poison that the cannabis available on the street is usually spiked with.
Yeah, we already had that part of the discussion.
You already
Yeah,
did
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Okay, and
So-
then like this, a lot of people are experimenting with cannabis dependency, like a cure for cannabis dependency, which is ruining their lives even more because they're being put on other experimental drugs or like other pharmaceutical drugs. And cannabis doesn't really ruin their lives as much as these drugs. And how can you curb that right now? Like,
Well, like a part of that is.
Let me quickly respond. The first part is that it would be an incorrect impression to carry home that when somebody comes to us, are not really sure whether he's taking cannabis or heroin or something else. We are. The people whom we diagnose as having cannabis dependence syndrome, which is a medical diagnosis, you can't just diagnose a medical condition just like that. We do carry out a detailed assessment only after that, as the person diagnosed to be having a certain medical condition. So that's an incorrect impression to carry. Secondly, it is again when we diagnose someone as having cannabis dependence syndrome, that diagnosis itself includes a lot of psychological, behavioral, social, legal and other problems that the person is suffering from. So again, that is, the second statement that you made is also sort of incorrect, that the cannabis is not really causing much harm, it's the treatments which
no,
are.
I never said it was not causing that much harm, but I was just saying that.
So these are people who are actually suffering from use of cannabis, and these are people who come to us voluntarily. Nobody is going to, tracking these people and labeling them with a certain diagnosis. These are people who themselves report to treatment for having problems associated with the use of cannabis.
But there have been times where they're forced into it, like as in like
that's a different issue altogether, and we are not really here to discuss.
I think
voluntary,
we've just changed the course of the discussion a little bit. So yeah. Pass the mic here.
So, yes. Just what we are just what he said correctly. Here we are just to see the plant. Cannabis is a plant, it's a medicine plant, and we have to identify what are the positive things it has. Ayurveda, I already told you, we have more than 100 formulations which are mentioned. Legally, one can go, company can make it. And for different, not for, only for Nasa and for sedative point of view, one can have a number of positive attributes are there, uses are there. One can go that way also. And now what we have now, a new theory, new legal, 2060 November, we have a new role of phyto-pharmaceutical, where any plant, it is not a case of cannabis, any plant, you can go for a drug, with some, you have to show efficacy, safety, and some active extract is there, just only clinical trial, and you have to endorse a few marker. They rule regulation on that. If you show that for any ailments, you just say, yeah, it is for cancer, and you demonstrate the efficacy, safety, and clinical trial. You can have a clearance for the drug regulator. So we generally think cannabis means only for sedative. Now this is the this NBRI and our Bombay Hemp Society has given this star. We will, educating people, they are doing. But research part always we neglected that part, science as a whole, being cannabis point of view. Even 2003 I have seen in Japan, I have seen they are working. They are working. All chemotypes of the cannabis. For India also, but we have not. We always said negative point. There are so many hundreds of positive points there. Only thing we have to scientific validation in Ayush mode, short term, and long term, we have a phyto-pharmaceutical rule also. We have not identified one molecule. Any fraction can be, if active for something, one can go in. So we have to think positive side also. What are positive things in in our plant, and what even we require, Dr. Ayush said morning session, what are traditional uses? We have never documented it. how much they are taking, for which medicine, for diarrhea also they are taking. Even opium was being taken a small amount for diarrhea also. And that thing will come up. What that data will help us to go for in our clinical study or animal study also. So that is a beginning. I think within 3-4 years or coming up, we will have something good, not for narcotic point of view, for this point of view, apart from the 5 or other things are there. So thank you.
Yeah, and also the other point that he mentioned earlier, right, that most of our ancient formulations are polyherbal. They are not like only one herb. They have other herbs together, they have other sugars and other proteins together that would probably be combating the psychoactive effects directly of the plant as well. We have a couple of closing questions from my end, and then we'll move on to the next panel as well. The last question that I really want to pose to the panel right now is that what kind of a role do we see for a country like India as well as for a country like Netherlands? Let's say these are both pioneers at different times. Like India was pioneering the cannabis movement thousands of years ago, and the Dutch are pioneering the modern day cannabis movement in a very modern narrative now. Where do you see is the confluence of these two ideologies? Because if there is one country that's doing it right globally, it is the Dutch. After multiple models that we've studied with the Israelis, with what's happening in the Americas right now, with what's happening in North America and certain parts of Europe. So where do we as Indians see the confluence with the Dutch, and where do the Dutch see a confluence to us as Indians? So that's my final question for the panel, and then we'll move on to the next one. Anyone wants to take this first? Dr. Navin Joshi?
Actually, the Dutch regulations and their GMP norms are very strict, and I think the licensing to a pharmaceutical company, also the Dutch module is quite different from the Indian module. And if we compare, or if we stand to Dutch module, then we have to implement the same or slightly the acts which has been made strictly, in my opinion.
Okay, at a policy level.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Agrawal?
Yeah, I think as a academician and a clinician, I think one of the things that we can probably look at, and Sir has already highlighted some of those gaps, that we need to carry out a lot of local research in this field, both in terms of use of medical marijuana and documenting the attendant problems, be it logistical as well as in terms of biological issues and side effects that people face. So I think one of the areas where we can work together is carrying out further research on medical marijuana in our country, and we would be more than keen to collaborate.
So we're counting on the Department of Psychiatry as a partner in the project with NBRI.
Sir is sitting right here, so I can't commit on the behalf of Department. So that would be a great idea.
Thank you so much. Arno, you have a point to make on that one.
So I'll finish with 2 points. Yes, they are pioneer in identification of some active compounds of that. That is where we are in having good knowledge of plants in our old textbook. Only thing we need validation. As such, we can have those drugs which having cannabis as one of the ingredients. There is no problem on that as per the Cosmetic Act. However, to make popularize it, we may have Ayurvedic proprietary medicine. We have to modify it, give some more comfort on that. And as per the Drug Cosmetic Act, Ayush Act, we have to show the validity, scientific validation, quality control, and the clinical trial. And the part what he has said here, for that we have to work a lot, because India is vast country, we have number of chemotypes, we know in the cannabis, and not only that, so part of the project we have with in CSIR, AIIMS is working on that. They have identified 53 jump class of different areas. They identify. So some part, India, yes, in CSL we are working. But again, to say IND or a pharmaceutical, we have to work as per the guidelines of FDA, that is international guideline. Safety, identification, 4 marker, clinical trial, safety to an animal, small, and that all guidance are there. So we can start whatever we have in our old time. We can start up, we can say it, and what path they have done it, we have to, again such same line, we have to assess our Indian germplasm, what they have, what terpene, sesquiterpene, cannabinoid they have, and we have developed all a quality control parameter, so that we can have batch-to-batch consistency, and same thing we can pass to international also. Yes, we have this, chemotypes we have, so that we can make the homogenization, or what we call it, uniformity in all over the world. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you, Dr. Rawat.
Yeah, what can we learn from each other? That's a very good question, huh? Yeah. Well, I think one of the most important things that I started to realize in our last few conferences, when we used the word standardized about 75 times in our presentation, I realized it started to sound a little bit robotic, a little bit like everybody gets the same thing all over the world, you get no choice, and that was completely the opposite of what we mean. Because what we mean with standardized is that we agree on quality standards. We're raising the bar where cannabis is right now. I give you a cannabis flower and you smoke it and you feel better. Yeah, that's where we started, but that's not where we're going to end, I hope. So we have to raise the bar, and that means that we have to set standards. Even for the simple fact that if I measure cannabis and I say it's 10% and you measure it and you say, no, it's 15, something isn't working here. And that shouldn't be allowed. It shouldn't be happening. Because why aren't we agreeing? Why can't we talk about the method and set one method, and it's called a monograph, methods that are transparent and verifiable. And the second is we see ourselves a little bit more as, not as a big seller of just cannabis, but we're a little bit more like the tool makers. Yes, we grow it, but we also make placebo. We also create lab methods. We also have isolation methods. We also make oil, but that's our way. It's not the way, that's our way. So you have an open discussion to figure out what works for who, but at least somebody has already a starting knowledge that you can jump on board. So basically the conclusion is, in the absence of one big pharma company making all the decisions for you, we're kind of doing this all together. And we have to do it in a more kind of an academic network setting. You all do a little bit, but it means you don't own the IP. And if you don't have the IP and the patent, you can't make a lot of money, so who's going to invest that money into this system? And I think that's where a combination of a traditional medicine system and a modern research system like India and Holland together can really make a third way besides traditional medicine, modern medicine, and then there's the cannabis way.
Yeah. Thank you so much, all the panelists, and thank you for all the questions and answers from the audience as well.